Hey everyone, I'm Jason. I've been at Facebook for 5 years, and this talk is about rewriting large software systems without disturbing users or developers. If you came here for the art of changing large software systems in place, this is the same talk, just been renamed. You could think of large software systems as mountains of product code layered on top of different layers of infrastructure. And changing the infrastructure underneath it is what I've worked on for the past few years. My team works on keeping Newsfeed's infrastructure up to date, so a lot of the work I do directly relates to this topic. As one example, here's Omer, a member of my team, talking at droidCon a few years back about how we rewrote Newsfeed's story rendering infrastructure to make the app more performant and Newsfeed's code more testable and more manageable. Another example of that work, here's Benjamin, another ex-member of my team, talking at droidCon New York last year about how we moved all our feeds in the app, I'm talking like newsfeed, pages, timeline, anything that looks like a feed of stories, over to recycler view from list view, and also the entire process of how we did that and how you could repeat that process if you were interested in moving your lists over to recycler view. So those are two of the big rewrites we've done in the app, and our team is constantly doing these kinds of rewrites. So I've got a lot of experience doing this stuff, and hopefully I can share some knowledge with you. So this time I'm going to be talking about the journey of rewriting the story rendering infrastructure one more time. Everyone has worked on a project and thought to themselves, should we rewrite this, right? Should we rewrite this network API? Or maybe should we rewrite a screen? And sometimes you go and thinking even bigger, and should we rewrite the entire app? Just throw it all out and rewrite it from the ground up. I hope this talk can help you answer that question and guide you through the entire process if you decide to go down that route. The first step of the process is not technical. You have to start with answering the question, why should we work on this? The reason it's important to answer that question is because you should always be focusing on impactful work. And this kind of work, rewriting things, is hard, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So you could be doing other things with that time, and if you can't justify spending a whole bunch of time rewriting chunks of your app for some outcome, then you shouldn't be doing it. I really like this one feature in Kotlin is not a good reason to rewrite your entire app. At this step, you need to be able to describe a problem that this work is going to solve for you. In the Facebook app, we've got a bunch of screens that look a lot like this. These are all the feeds in the app. We've got an enormous amount of code to render things that look like this. And there are hundreds of developers every single month touching the code that makes this come to life. They're adding new features, they're making modifications to the way the stories look, and it's happening every single month. So the stories keep getting more and more complex over time, and rendering them keeps getting slower. So there's also an enormous amount of time spent on surfaces that look exactly like this. So we needed a solution to accommodate the growing complexity of story rendering while allowing new features to be built and performance to stay something reasonable. And we needed to change this heavily used infrastructure in the app without our users or developers noticing. Then Lucas Roca told us he was going to make a UI rendering framework to solve exactly this problem. It enables background thread layout and fine-grained view recycling. Pasquale and Marco recently posted about it in the Facebook engineering blog in a post titled Open Sourcing Litho, a declarative UI framework for Android. Not only would it fix our problem, it would also improve developer experience in a bunch of other important ways for Facebook engineers specifically. The why for adopting components in our app was compelling. Once you've nailed down a great reason to rewrite the app, where do you start? Up until now, you've only explained the reason for doing the work. Your next step is to prove that doing the work will have the outcome that you expect. You could be wrong. Maybe background thread layout won't actually help, and maybe fine-grained view recycling is overrated. And maybe there aren't a ton of people who will ride that new subway line. Does this look familiar to anyone? Yeah. This is a second half subway line in New York. It just opened on January 1st, and just like us, they started by explaining the value of doing their work, and then they set out to prove their expectations. They didn't want to spend a bunch of time and money building an entire new line if it wasn't going to have the outcome on the users that they expected. So what did they do? They split the process up into a few different phases. And phase 1 is actually what opened on January 1st. So we need to do the same thing in our process, right? We need to split our own process into phases so we can prove this out. Why should you make this change incrementally? Why bother splitting this work into several different phases? Well, there are a few milestones that I think are important anytime you set out to rewrite a giant chunk of your app. Each milestone is going to give you important information about how the project is going, and each step of the way you should be minimizing the amount of work necessary to answer that next question in the process. This incremental approach also helps you understand how to change an entire large piece of the app piece by piece. So every time I've done this, I've thought about phase 1 as proving your expectations. How do you do that? I recommend choosing one relatively easy thing to migrate to your new infrastructure, and also one relatively hard thing. Don't pick the easiest thing, don't pick the hardest thing. A couple things in the middle. In our case, we converted the story's text and the story's header. And by making those first couple changes towards our goal, we had the opportunity to prove that the change was valuable, and also to understand a bit of the work that was ahead of us that we didn't know ahead of time. So these are some of the problems we initially ran into when we were proving our expectations. The story's text is really simple, but still, we screwed it up at first. You can see here the text is running right off the screen. At the beginning, even those things, the easy things, can be hard. But the header is a lot more complicated than a line of text. And that was a shit show. The early days were plagued with Flexbox bugs. What did we get out of this process? Well, we found a ton of optimizations we could make in the framework. We found plenty of missing features that we would need to keep making the next changes. And we found a ton of bugs. We proved that we could get the value that we expected out of the work, and we could also learn more about the work we had ahead of us. Now it's time to estimate the cost. In most cases for us, that means how long will this take, or how many people will have to work on this project, or something in terms of time. By now you've overcome some of the most frequent obstacles that you'll see in the entire process, and you've hacked your way around others while proving this thing out. And you've gained enough foresight to know that some of the obstacles in your path will be harder than you expected. Be honest about the fact that there are still a ton of unknowns here, and you can really only estimate the stuff you know about. Here's an excerpt from the Second Ave subway Wikipedia page. It says, "The entire line from Water Street to 180th Street in the Bronx was expected to be completed by 1980. So this just opened 9 months ago. And actually, only phase 1 of 4 opened 9 months ago. So keep that in mind. Like, these big infrastructural changes, they take time, they take effort, and you might get your estimate wrong. You could get it wrong in both directions. You could be much faster than you anticipate. You could also be much slower than you anticipate. You might even get it wrong several times along the way. I mean, this is the table of contents from the Second Ave subway Wikipedia page. Take a look at when they started. It was 1919. They started planning this thing 100 years ago. If you were off by 2 or 3x, would the work still be worth doing? Would it still be the best use of your time? If not, now might be the right time to cancel the project before you invest too much time into it. When we had to make our decision, there were hundreds of views that needed converting, and we knew this wasn't going to be a 1-month-long project. We had a lot of work. So eventually you've proven that this new direction is worth the amount of effort you think it'll take. This is the point where you start kicking off migrations in earnest. At this point, I like to bring in a partner, someone I trust, and someone that trusts me. You might be the only person that's seen this new code so far, and you're blind to some of its shortfalls. This is still relatively early in the process, so nothing is actually 100% ready for taking over the entire app. There's still a ton of risk at this stage, and if you're going to partner with someone, you want them to be comfortable riding out the rough terrains, and being a contributor when it gets tough. My team was the first adopter for litho. The first conversions were hard, and you saw some of the bugs, text writing off the screen, things overlapping on each other. We identified a ton of them. We fixed some of them ourselves, but oftentimes we were just entirely blocked from making any progress on the migration at all because there were just bugs in our way that we couldn't overcome ourselves. So there is a high cost to being that first partner in this deal. And you have to understand that when you ask someone to be that first partner with you, that they're taking on some costs as well. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner debuted at about $150 to $200 million with configurations that seated about 250 to 350 people. Being one of the first few customers to buy a 787 is a risky situation. Being one of the customers when in its first year of service, at least 4 aircraft suffered from electrical system problems, up to and including smoke and fire while in flight. That's a frustrating situation. This is the heavily burned battery from flight JA829J after it suffered from thermal runaway. Following this and several other electrical failures, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered a review into the design and manufacturing of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which resulted in the full grounding of the entire fleet. Only 2 US-based airlines operated the Dreamliner at the time, and only 50 of the aircraft were sold and operating when this happened. Being an early adopter of the new technology means risking your own time and money in the partnership. All of them lost valuable time and money because of these electrical failures. It took 3 months before the FAA allowed the US Dreamliners to return to service and 4 months before the first US operator actually returned its aircraft to service, and that was United. Jeff Smyzik, hope I pronounced that right, was the CEO of United at the time, and after the planes returned to service, he said about the months the plane sat idle, it was a fairly expensive piece of sculpture to have on the ground. The next phase where I notice a big change in the process is when you've established the new normal. The change you're making is starting to take over the app. It's got most of the necessary features you're going to need to spread it throughout the rest of the app and finish the work. The most valuable way I find to keep the process rolling and making progress towards the goal of replacing the old infrastructure is by enforcing that no new content in the app, no new products, no new features are built on top of the old stuff. Even if it's a tight deadline, make it work. Like work with the team, work with the product to make it work on the new stuff. Throw some hacks in there if you need to, just make it work. Why do you need to do this? Well, it's easy for the people around you who aren't as involved in the project as you to keep producing new features and products on the old infrastructure. It's familiar to them, they're used to working with it. So you want to get them aware of the new infrastructure and make sure they can use it for their needs so that you can eventually stop supporting the old infrastructure. Establishing the new normal can sometimes lead to uncomfortable situations. You already have something that works and does what you need. It's been working for 60 years. Why change? You need to charge the new infra. It costs a lot more money. And plus, you've already got a bunch of copies of the old infra lying around. Now they're worthless or need a dongle. There are growing pains associated with learning how to work with the new infra. By the time you're involving everyone else in that new work, in your crazy plan to rewrite the app, you've proven to yourself and your closest partners that the work is worth doing. But now you have to prove it to everyone else. You're asking everyone to make that effort and that sacrifice to learn this new stuff, right? You might need to explain the rewrite a few more times along the way. And if you did your due diligence up until this point, then the growing pains are worth the payoff, right? Take as much constructive criticism as you can at this point and incorporate that into your future plans for improving. And finally, everything in the app is running on your shiny new stuff, right? But you're not done yet. You have some cleanup to do. And why do you have to clean up? Well, because you've thrown in a bunch of hacks along the way to keep products rolling and at the beginning stages when you weren't really sure what you were doing. And really, if you want the life of the app to keep going well, then you need all the infrastructure that it's built on top to be clear in its purpose, to have a simple API, and to be usable by everyone for the things that they need. What should you be cleaning up? Well, like I said, there's things that you threw in there, hacks to get things working, but also there's a bunch of transitionary code, things that you needed to interoperate between the old infra and the new stuff. And all that stuff is not actually necessary when it's all built on the infra that's intended. This kind of stuff can build up during the process, and you should spend some time at the end of the migration just cleaning it up. So that's the general outline I like to follow for changing large software systems. You got to start by explaining why it's worth it, prove that you were correct, estimate the cost, scale the adoption, establish the new normal, and then clean up. But before I go, I'd like to offer a few tips for how to go about this process. Every step of the way, I recommend starting by implementing a wedge. This is some of the stuff that I was talking about cleaning up before. You want to minimize the surface area of the code base that is concerned about the change that you're making. There should be a single point in the code base that forks between the old behavior and the new behavior. And in Java terms, this is usually just an interface that the old stuff and the new stuff both implement. There's one example, something I think about a lot is what story rendering is like. So story has a header. And at the top of the story, the header has this avatar. It's got the name of the poster, some timestamp, maybe a menu button and other stuff. So the story knows how to render a header, but it doesn't need to care about whether it's mounting a component or drawing a view. Similarly, if you're rewriting part of your app, it should still be able to carry out the same expected basic functions that can be translated to some interface. Don't mistake motion for progress. I see this happen frequently where people are writing a bunch of code, making plenty of changes, but they're not actually getting any closer to the goal. Each step of the way, think about how the change you're making now is bringing you closer to the goal of finishing the migration. On the other hand, excessive rigidity in the process is brittle. If you know you can get to the goal in just a few steps, but there are other projects going on at the same time that will make your work more challenging, you have to accept those challenges and learn how to work within the constraints that are actually happening within the app. There are plenty of blockers that can come up during the process. They're both technical and non-technical. Think about how you can continue to make progress towards the goal without getting hung up on the actual problems that are going to get in your way. The best approach I've found can be summarized as fast failures and constant reevaluation. Remember, you're rewriting a big piece of the app. It's likely that the goalpost is going to be moving while you're working on this. And there are technical and non-technical obstacles popping up all along the way. Make some progress, acknowledge the changing landscape, and then plan your next step. Thanks for hearing me out. I hope some of you found this useful. If you'd like to talk about this kind of work, components, anything Android, you can come find me after, or you can ask some questions now. Thanks. Nope.
So when you're changing these,
We got a mic up here too.
when you're changing these large, moving pieces, like it's very risky in the application. Some of the bugs are obvious and some of them are subtle. How do you manage like your testing and your risk and when I'm making this large architecture change?
Yeah, so I would recommend using an A/B testing framework and then measuring the things that are most important to you. And it's like you got to be careful with being too heavy on this A/B testing because there are parts that are going to be more complicated than others, parts that are more risky and critical to the company and application than others. So like you really want to be able to like slow down and make sure the changes you're making are genuine at the points when they're most critical.
A/B testing, meaning in production, in your production app, like you'll.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys do automated like unit testing on your app, and how do you?
Yeah, definitely. You definitely want to unit test, but like you said, like some of these are super complex, like integration bugs where you're not going to be able to catch it ahead of time. So there are going to be edge cases you don't catch locally, and those you really just have to leave it up to the app and see like, all right, are we increasing crashes dramatically and totally killing someone's experience? Like, that's when you got to deal with it.
Okay, thank you.
So even if you're using a recommended methodology of like fast failures and constant reevaluation, how do you come up with reasonable estimates, especially if you don't know how many fast failures you might bump into?
Yeah. So the estimation is actually, like, I kind of spent a lot of time on how estimation could be wrong, and that's a lot of the reason for it, is because the goalpost is moving, and you might have some idea of how much that goalpost will move in the time that you think, right? So you're trying to bake this into your estimates, but it's not going to be perfect, and you're not going to be aware of all the future things that get in your way. Like maybe there's some brand new project that comes up in the middle of your work that totally throws off your estimate, and so at the points of the reevaluation is when I would reevaluate my estimate. So if I'm being blocked because of something small and I know it'll just add a couple days to the estimate, like no big deal. But if it's going to add weeks or months or whatever, that's when you want to really surface there's big changes to this estimate that I originally came up with.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.